This is the Scout Trooper helmet from Return of the Jedi, 3D printed. I'll leave the file down in the description and enjoy the video. So for this project I'm printing on the Vertex stick-on print surface. Works really well with prints, and I found doesn't need any scraping off or anything. It grips the prints, but they all come off really easily, so I'm really impressed with it. So all of the main pieces are printed for the helmet now. So you've got the visor here, the top helmet, the back. I had one issue with my printer where the bed connector actually failed, so I've got a print here that stopped halfway and I had to finish it off by printing a separate part sliced. But other than that, I didn't run into too many issues. This is the 3D printer case that I made for my A-level in college, and on the bottom, to reduce vibration through the floor, I've got it sat on a cushion. And that does help quite a lot with the sound. I do tend to print this with the door slightly open because I am afraid of overheating the power supply because it is on the inside of the case. The filament feeds in through the top, and I find this is better than being sat in the case or just outside because the filament can be fed straight down through the top. To glue the pieces together, I use 2-part epoxy resin, and this holds the parts really strong together. I use masking tape to hold the pieces together while the epoxy dries. It usually dries within 5 minutes and has a cure time of 24 hours. Wooden clothes pegs help a lot when aligning parts together as well. Now all the main pieces are dry, I'm going to be using small pieces of fiberglass matting to reinforce the seams. I cut the fiberglass into small manageable strips that can follow the contours of the pieces easily. I use the same 2-part epoxy resin to soak the fiberglass and strengthen the part. Now I'm going to be using car body filler to fill in all the seams between the pieces. Once I'd finished with the body filler, I used 100 grit sandpaper to smooth it all down. As you can see, I was sanding over a few days, and it is a lot of hard work. Make sure you use a respirator because the body filler dust is really bad for your lungs. We get in there. This spray filler fills in the print lines nicely. You put a layer on and then sand down the high bits, but it stays in the print lines, so when you go over it again, you just carry on sanding it. Gradually the print lines disappear and you can see starting to get quite a nice smooth finish there. So I've put on the last layer of filler primer. I've gone over it with 150 grit sandpaper to get rid of the majority of the imperfections. And then before I put a layer of paint on, I'm going to go over it with 240 grit sandpaper. Once I had completely finished sanding and was happy with the finish, I used a gloss white spray paint to cover all of the parts. I then used Rust Olam's Crystal Clear to cover all the parts and cover the paint with a nice clear seal. I paint all of the detail pieces before fitting them onto the helmet. I've mixed up a dark grey that is very similar to the colour of the filament that I've used. The paint will just cover up some of the print lines, give it a nice finish. It's got some black details in there as well, so there's a black bit on the grille, but everything else is dark grey, so it's quite easy. The main paint job of the helmet is finished now, and I've painted all the details on, but there is one thing missing, and it's the battle damage and weathering. Now, I've never used my airbrush properly on a project before, so this is going to be kind of an experiment to see whether it'll work or not. I'm going to airbrush maybe some brown, kind of dusty colour, maybe a bit of green from like the leaves from the woodland, because in Return of the Jedi they are going through big forests, so you know, branches clipping the helmet, things like that, and we'll see how it turns out. Now, from practicing, I have already mixed up a dark brown, so I might see how that works. If it's too dark, I'll just mix another colour. The weathering turned out just as I'd hoped. Very light layer of paint just to represent dust. And as you've probably heard with a lot of other people doing similar projects like this, that when it comes to weathering, less is often more. You never want to overdo it with the weathering because it can look out of place if you do it too much.
They say love like this comes once in a lifetime. For the first time I believe it.
To make the visor, I started by tracing the shape of the visor onto a piece of paper so I knew what shape it needed to be.
You know, every piece falls into place when I'm with you.
I used black tinted film, which is used on limousines, to make the visor black. So there we go, I've made the visor. It took me about 3 or 4 attempts to get it right, and I found that the tint is very difficult to get on once the visor's already bent. So I actually cut a new sheet and then put the tint on when it was flat and then bent it afterwards. And now it's time to fit it.
Time is now to go where we want to.